We all love the movie The Matrix and the holodeck, and the question is, when will we be able to enter a room and create this imaginary scenario so realistic that it seems as if we're really there? It turns out that we scientists are making progress in that direction even as we speak. First of all, in the future, the internet will be in your contact lens. You will blink and you will go online. You will see individuals and their biography will appear, and subtitles will appear if they speak in Chinese. So you will always know who you're talking to and what they are saying, even if they speak in a different language. Now think about this. If you have internet contact lenses, then you can imagine and conjure up different kinds of bizarre universes. Just like in The Matrix, you can be thrust into an alien environment, you could have shootouts with aliens, you could have all sorts of wondrous things take place inside your contact lens.
Let me introduce you to Mini-Me. Render Keynote.
いわゆるニューラル TTS を使用しています。私たちは自分の声の録音を使用し、私のように聞こえる私自身の個人的な音声署名を作成します。
Now, as you can see, this is mind-blowing technology. And what you just saw was my life-size hologram, my exact replica, rendered here in real time, speaking Japanese with my unique voice signature. So it sounded exactly like me, just speaking Japanese. And the most amazing part? All of these technologies exist today. The future is here.
Many years ago, when I was of high school age, I don't know, like 16 or 17, and still living at home with my parents, I remember one time my mom called for me from the living room to see if I could help her figure something out on the family desktop computer. And when I walked into the room, I saw my beloved mom sitting there with her head in her hands and just visibly distraught with frustration. And of course, I asked her what the problem was and how I could help. And as it turned out, the issue was something surprisingly simple regarding the general use of email. Something like, how do I send this email to multiple addresses? Or how do I forward this email? Or something like that. I don't really recall the details. But I do remember that moment, as random and trivial as it may seem. And the reason that it stuck with me is because it sort of spurred a profound revelation to me. Because it caused me to recognize that my mom's generation was not prepared for the advent of the internet age, and that the menial skills which I had taken for granted, things like typing or configuring computer settings, were things that the older generations were unfamiliar with and often struggling to figure out. And it made me really sad, honestly. And after I helped and returned to whatever it was that I was doing, I continued to ponder it, because in the old days, society always relied on the wisdom and the experience and the expertise of the older generation. And there was an inherent value and respect that came with growing old, because the younger generations understood that they would eventually require the knowledge of their elders. But in my lifetime, and in that moment, as a teenager helping my mom figure out how to send an email, I realized that technology was creating a gap between the generations, and that everybody older than me would soon be at a severe disadvantage in terms of, career choice or advancement opportunities, because the world was undergoing a transition into a digital age, wherein society would be required to understand the function and operation of these technologies, which came easily to those in my generation and to me and people younger than me, because we were educated and trained for this stuff in a classroom setting. But meanwhile, the older generations were kind of unexpectedly thrust into a new world where you got to either adapt or get left behind. And it really is incredible to consider the speed in which these modern technologies are adopted and embraced by our society. And with each phase in development becoming a social necessity of its time, before being made obsolete after being replaced by whichever new and improved technology arrives. At this moment in time, we are physically separated from the devices which we log into the internet world on. So reality still presents a distinct barrier between what is real and physical and what is digital and artificial. But what will happen when humanity gets plugged into the internet? When man becomes coupled with the internet. And notice I didn't ask if man gets plugged into the internet, but when. Because like it or not, this is very much the goal of big tech companies like Microsoft and others. So try to imagine seeing your everyday life through a lens that combined the environment around you with any variety of virtual reality widgets and labels and news blurbs and icons inserted to your field of view. That's a crazy thought, right? But now imagine how much different your perception of things may have been had you been experiencing your life through this lens since childhood. And instead of running freely through the fields and exploring the mysteries of your backyard like your grandfather did when he was young, you are instead alone in your bedroom, distracted under a constant barrage of entertainment and information. And you have some friends, but they're also alone in their rooms being showered in entertainment. And most of your interactions with them would be made on social media, and some of your friends may have never even met you in the real world. Heck, some of your friends might just be bots. And if you haven't noticed, this coming so-called normal lifestyle that I'm describing is not a far stretch from life as we know it here in 2020. I mean, already our culture has slipped into a state of voluntary isolation as our beloved technology grows more and more immersive. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here. I mean, everybody already sees the sad trajectory of our society in terms of, warmth and closeness and intimacy and relationships and genuine companionship with others. We acknowledge the death of these things. As if we have collectively decided to abandon these things in pursuit of a more gratifying and entertaining and pleasurable experience in our short time here on Earth. And as a result, we don't really ever talk or laugh with strangers anymore. In fact, we try to avoid eye contact with strangers. You don't want to come off like some kind of weirdo. Just keep your eyes to the ground. And we don't really talk to our friends or family for that matter either. We're quicker to send a text. And even those texts have become less personal. The communication line between us has been degraded to the point that kids now just send digital emojis to one another, in an effort to express feelings which are far too complex to ever be articulated through a simple cartoon facial expression. And meanwhile, everybody is spilling their hearts and their feelings into their computers and their phones and their internet devices, and updating their social media accounts several times a day to vent about all types of things that would really require a conversation to cope with. But instead, we just settle for a thumbs up icon or a care emoji, because we understand that everybody else is busy with their own social media posts that they got to manage, And somehow our tech devices have become the new outlet by which we express our deepest and most passionate feelings. And it's really a sad picture, to see a sea of people who desire to connect with one another, and they're standing shoulder to shoulder, but their heads are all down, and they're fully engaged in their own little digital worlds, and everyone has a million things to say, but nobody's talking, just typing. And what's worse is that nobody on the other end is even going to read whatever it is that you're posting, at least not with the same level of interest that you'd want for them to, because, they got their own posts to collect likes and emojis on. So the question is, what does it look like when you look, 10 years down the line into the future of human communication and expression and interaction in context with the current state of things? Do you remember what I said at the end of part 1 of this video series? That now man has created a new version of life itself. It's called virtual reality. Not virtual fiction, not virtual fantasy, virtual reality. And the footage that you are seeing right now comes from the original commercial advertisement for Microsoft's HoloLens, which is about 5 years old at this point. And as you would expect, the technology has only advanced from that point. And in fact, Microsoft has now released the HoloLens 2. And this is where things start to get serious. Because in the beginning of this year, in January of 2020, Microsoft created a promotional campaign for the HoloLens 2. And for some strange reason that has left many people scratching their heads, Microsoft chose none other than one of the world's most prolific and famous occultic sorcerers to promote this new product, the highly acclaimed witch Marina Abramovic. Instead of treating the public to some type of exciting experience with the Microsoft HoloLens 2, they chose to go with a boring and weird demonstration by a 73-year-old witch who apparently just stood before the viewers in a Whore of Babylon-style red dress as she expounded on some artsy and poetic ideas relating to the connection of imagination with reality. And the performance was titled Marina Abramovic's The Life, which is sort of ironic considering how boring and lifeless the performance appears to have been. And in fact, this presentation was so unpopular with the guests that Microsoft not only ended the campaign prematurely, but even pulled the YouTube video which went along with it. I guess that the world was just baffled by Microsoft's strange decision to use a divisive personality like Abramovic as some sort of spokesman for the product. But so what, right? I mean, so what if Microsoft chose a known occultist to be the poster lady for their new VR product? I mean, it's not like virtual reality, and Microsoft and these other tech companies have a history of commonality with witchcraft and sorcery. I mean, are you sure? Here you got an occultic elemental pentagram. And here's a variation that you may have seen before if your grandpa was a Freemason, or maybe at a parade or something. This is the symbol for the Order of the Eastern Star. And they're one and the same, really. And I want you to notice the color configuration here. Red, green, blue, yellow. Red is fire, green is earth, blue is water, and yellow is air. I don't know about you guys, but I just feel like I've seen this somewhere before. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Because in a lot of cases, the very premise of some of these ideas are in conflict with your foundational convictions. It's kind of like that scene from the movie Jurassic Park, where the park's creator is explaining to the visitors the science behind how they managed to resurrect these dinosaurs from extinction, And then Jeff Goldblum's character says something like, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. And I think that virtual reality is another one of these concepts that society should beware of by principle alone. But I guess that perhaps it's too late for that now. Regardless, it's a shameful thing that mankind maintains an interest in the pursuit of this existential escapism. Myself being just as guilty as the next guy in a lot of ways. I mean, as I said before, I play video games sometimes, and my wife and I will watch movies sometimes. I'm sitting here making a YouTube videos for crying out loud. And if it's not that obvious, I spend a decent amount of time researching these things on the internet for hours at a time as well. And as hypocritical as this message might seem in light of those admissions, I think if you're honest, you'd admit that in 2020, this is just how life goes now. And it's certainly not very difficult to predict where it's going to go from here. And when society soon adopts this new augmented reality technology into our daily lives, which I'm willing to wager will occur probably in the fourth quarter of this Great Reset initiative that we're all currently being subjected to. But you'll be able to look back and recall the multitude of ways that we'd been conditioned to anticipate and accept this thing, and that we've been prepared for this. I mean, I'm 35 years old, and I have no doubt that I spent way too much time in front of a screen throughout my childhood. And yet most of my time was spent constructively, playing outside and running around with my friends. And even back then, the adults would criticize the amount of time that kids were wasting on our phones. And we didn't even have internet or nothing. We just had games like Snake and Falling Numbers. And if you had a super expensive phone, then you might have something like Pac-Man. But even then, just with the mere advent of texting, my generation became just a little less social, And then the video games started getting really cool and good with these expansive worlds that you could explore and popular games that required over 100 hours to complete. And so in elementary school, I couldn't wait to get out of school so that I could go play outside. And then in junior high, I couldn't wait to get out of school so that I could go, play with my friends. But then within a few years, sometimes I couldn't wait to get out of high school just so that I could get back to my game in my room by myself. And some nights I would just play these video games all night long, I might text a couple friends throughout the course of the evening, but besides eating dinner, I would often have no reason to open my mouth to say a word. And my adventures were being played out on a TV screen instead of in my neighborhood. And then came the smartphones, and they brought the media obsession and the porn addiction and the social media, along with all those feelings of jealousy and envy and lust and inadequacy that came along with social media on sites like Zanga and MySpace, and then finally Facebook, followed by the depression, which would result in even more sedentary screen time, in front of movies and more video games. And for a short period of my life, that was my lifestyle. And then I got older, and I found salvation in Jesus Christ, and eventually I broke free from the sad cycle of this screen-to-screen lifestyle. But I also have kids now, and I think about this younger generation and these innocent little people, and they're surrounded by a million temptations and enticements which seek to drag them into that same pit that I was in. These poor kids, and they're bombarded with just every form of propaganda that you could imagine through these modern devices, which are literally designed to interact with the human brain at a subconscious level. And I remember being a little boy wearing my Ninja Turtles pajamas and playing Nintendo with my brother, and we were often blown away by the graphics and the realism of these old games that look embarrassing by today's standard. And I also remember having a sleepover at my buddy Josh's house one night, and we stayed up all night playing Nightmare on Elm Street, and the game really scared me, and it actually made it hard for me to sleep that night. It just breaks my heart to think of all the nightmares being introduced to children worldwide. Never mind all the porn and sexual predators and hackers and all that other stuff. And so our cultural trajectory in terms of technology has become, rather obvious. We will, of course, continue sliding further down this rabbit hole and further from the surface of the world that we once called home, back when people talked and knew their neighbors and helped each other and, lived a little. And this VR thing, it's always had a reasonable attraction as a form of passive entertainment, which is why it was introduced through the scope of video gaming. Plus, it's also shown some promising benefits in areas like education and engineering, and some stuff like this. But now that we're comfortable with the existence of this virtual reality technology, just get ready for the introduction and implementation of this technology to the general public on a much larger scale. And kind of like Michio Kaku explains in the intro to this video, the next phase of VR will not be a headset to put on and use within the confines of your living room, but it will be in contact lenses which you wear as you go about your life, looking at life through the view of a digital lens, artificially decorating the world around you with a constant stream of information and entertainment and every other variety of distraction. And not to switch directions too fast, but how do you suppose that it would make God feel to see mankind in this state? After generations of rebellion and disobedience, mankind has finally created an all-encompassing barrier between man and the natural world and circumstance that we were created to reside in. And it's like that Tower of Babel comparison, which was also in the intro of this video. Because in that occasion, when man attempted to build a tower to reach heaven, and try to be equal with God, God punished mankind by separating our languages so that we could no longer easily communicate with other nations. So now you see why the Antichrist desires to reunite the nations with a global government. And in 2020, we now apparently have the technology to alter your speech to accommodate every known language, like you saw with that girl speaking Japanese. So it's another attempted curse reversal. Or how about God's punishment to women, in the way of the pain and suffering that goes along with labor and childbirth? In 2020, we got around that curse with abortion. And in that same account, God also punished man with the responsibility to toil and work hard to survive. And in 2020, AI robotic manufacturing comes along, which, by the way, I think we could expect in the third quarter of the Great Reset. But yeah, so it's another curse reversal, or an attempted curse reversal at least. And so if I had to guess, I'd say that God is probably not too fond of this mockery and imitation of reality that we're trying to create down here. And look, remember that this VR stuff is just one facet of this transition process that we're undergoing right now.